Today, we're tackling something I think a lot of us have felt while watching a movie, that nagging feeling that we've seen this kind of story before. We're going to explore whose stories really get told on the big screen, and more importantly, why. Okay, let's kick things off with this quote, because it's just so relatable. The author, Andrew Butler, is listing some of his favorite movies, and they're great movies. But then he has this realization that from a feminist perspective, they're not exactly rich with complex female characters. If you've ever scrolled through your own go-to film list and had that same thought, well, you are definitely not alone. And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? Why does this pattern pop up over and over again in so many of the movies we love? It's not just a coincidence. There's actually a kind of hidden structure at play, a blueprint. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look at it. So, to figure out what's happening on the screen, we've got to start by asking a really simple question. Who's actually behind the camera? Because at the end of the day, the storyteller's perspective is what shapes the entire story. And here's the big one, the fact that really underpins everything else we're going to talk about. In Hollywood, and in most mainstream movie making, the people making the key creative decisions, we're talking directors, producers, are overwhelmingly men. And that imbalance has a massive ripple effect on the kinds of stories that get told. This imbalance leads to a really deep-seated bias. Our source material points to this kind of unspoken rule in storytelling. Stories centered on men are treated as universal. They're for everyone. But stories centered on women, all too often, they get labeled as niche. You know, they're particular, domestic, or just for a smaller, specific audience. Okay, so you've got this imbalance behind the camera. How does that actually show up on screen? Well, it often boils down to a pretty predictable formula. A kind of blueprint you've probably seen 100 times without even realizing it. I mean, this is the classic playbook, especially for those big blockbuster war and sci-fi movies. Step 1, your story's about a male hero. Step 2, his main antagonist is a male villain. Step 3, his closest confidant, his best friend, is another man. But what about the women? Well, as we're about to see, their place in this formula is a lot more specific. And here we have it. According to this formula, the female characters are often there for one of three main jobs: to be eye candy for the hero, to be the classic damsel in distress who needs rescuing, or sometimes just to be there to prove the hero is straight. The key thing to notice is that their entire purpose is to help develop the male hero's story, not to have one of their own. You see, this formula doesn't just limit what female characters can do in these movies. It really limits who they can be. And over the decades, this has created a kind of recurring cast of stock characters, stereotypes that show up again and again and again. Before we jump into those types, we need to get this key term down. The word for this kind of character is a counter. Think of them like a piece on a chessboard in the male hero's game. They're a plot device. This is the exact opposite of an agent, a character who drives their own story and makes their own choices. So, let's look at some of these classic counters. All right, first up, we have the angel of the house. She is the pure, perfect domestic ideal. You know her. She is the wife waiting patiently at home in countless war movies. Her perfect life isn't really a story in itself, it's the prize that the male hero is fighting to come home to. Next, of course, there's the victim. This character is pretty much defined by her suffering. She's the damsel in distress, totally passive, existing to have bad things happen to her so that the hero can step in, prove his heroism, and save the day. And then we've got the girlfriend. Her entire world seems to revolve around the male lead. She's there to support him, to worry about him, and maybe to reward him at the end, but we almost never get to see her own life, her own friends, or her own ambitions outside of his story. Okay, now this next one is a little different. Sometimes called the whore with a heart of gold, this character often has more agency, right? But that independence is almost always framed as morally questionable. She's either a corrupting influence on the hero or a tragic figure that needs saving from herself. And speaking of power, that brings us to the femme fatale. She's that classic, cold, calculating woman from film noir who uses her sexuality like a weapon. She's smart, she's powerful, but she's always presented as this dangerous threat that the hero ultimately has to contain or defeat. So what happens to women in these movies when they get older? Well, their roles often get squeezed into this one stereotype, the crone. She might be a source of mysterious, cryptic wisdom, like a fortune teller, or maybe more commonly, she's just a figure of ridicule, like a nosy neighbor who isn't meant to be taken seriously. And finally, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum from that angelic mother, you have the castrating mother. This mother figure is anything but pure. She's domineering, sinister, and her main role in the story is to undermine the power and authority of the men around her, making her a kind of villain in her own home.
Okay, so we've seen the formula, we've seen this limited cast of recurring characters. It kind of makes you wonder, right? What's the alternative? How do we break out of this box and start telling stories in a different way?
And our source material poses this exact question. I mean, if mainstream film has been built for so long on a masculine language and structure, what would a truly female cinema even look like? Would it focus on different things? Would it have different kinds of endings? And as an audience, would we even be ready for it? So we're going to leave you with a little bit of homework. This whole thing isn't just about spotting tropes to feel smart. It's about becoming a more active, critical viewer. So the next time you sit down to watch a film, new or old, just ask yourself these two simple questions. Whose story is really being told here? And who is this story for? The answers just might change the way you see movies forever.